This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Susie Garrett. Brought to you by...
Sailing through the heart of historic cities and landscapes on a river, you get close to iconic landmarks, to local life, to cultural treasures. Viking River Cruises, exploring the world in comfort.
Home economics. The president wants to phase out the two government companies at the heart of the financial crisis, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Will the plan make mortgages costlier and harder to get? And is that the price of getting Uncle Sam out of the housing business?
Power outage. How vulnerable are the nation's utilities to a cyber attack? Experts say it's not a matter of if, but when, and the cost to you could be high.
Compete and beat. How mom and pop manufacturers, once left for dead, are making a big comeback and competing successfully against foreign rivals. Our Made in America series continues tonight on Nightly Business Report for Tuesday, August 6th.
Good evening, everyone. President Obama taking aim today at boosting home ownership by proposing an overhaul of the nation's massive mortgage market. His targets? Longtime political hot potatoes, mortgage companies Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Diana Olick joins us from Washington with more on what this all might mean. Diana, over to you.
Well, Susie, it should come as no surprise that mortgage finance is front and center for the president. As interest rates are rising, some say credit is the last barrier to full housing recovery.
Our housing market is beginning to heal.
President Obama returned to Arizona, one of the hardest hit states in the housing crash, 4 years after using this desert backdrop to announce his housing bailout. It was part victory lap, part call to action.
We've got to turn the page on this kind of bubble and bust mentality that helped to create this mess in the first place. We got to build a housing system that is durable and fair and rewards responsibility for generations to come.
The president's sights are set on reforming the nation's $10 trillion mortgage market, making the process easier for home buyers and putting private capital at the center of housing finance while pulling government out. That means a gradual wind down of giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which together with the FHA now back over 90% of all new loans.
I believe that our housing system should operate where there's a limited government role and private lending should be the backbone of the housing market.
The president's plan to make investors pay up front for a limited, transparent government guarantee of mortgage securities mirrors a bipartisan bill now in the Senate. That bill, put forth by Senators Corker and Warner, so far has the most support of any proposal.
We're really at a critical time for housing finance reform. If they can't get a bill through the Senate Banking Committee this fall, you may be able to write off housing finance reform for the entire Obama administration. In many ways, it's now or never.
The concern is that winding down the government mortgage giants will inevitably make loans more expensive. Low rates have been credited for much of housing's recovery.
The fact that interest rates were so low, it made buying a home affordable for a lot of people.
Now, in addition to overhauling mortgage finance, President Obama called on Congress to allow borrowers who do not have government-backed loans to refinance through Fannie, Freddie, and the FHA. That would transfer risk to taxpayers yet again, though, something Congress is unlikely to do. Tyler?
Diana, I got a complicated doubleheader of a question for you. If Fannie and Freddie stop buying mortgages from banks that want to get them off their balance sheet and thus ensuring a continuous flow of lending capital, who would buy them? And second, you say the president's plan would require investors to pay up for a limited government guarantee of mortgage-backed securities. How would that work and who'd pay the cost?
Well, to start with your first question, it would be investors who would have to buy these loans. Right now, there is a very little private market. There's some in the jumbo loan arena, but for conventional loans, really, it's Fannie, Freddie, and the FHA. So the idea is to get private investors back into market. That said, the second part of your question is how much would it cost them and how would it all work? Again, you know, the devil's going to be in the details. These are very broad spectrum proposals. There's still a lot going on in Congress, and we don't know exactly how it would work, but we do know that it's going to have to be very carefully done, and there's going to be all kinds of overlays for investors, and it could, critics say at least, make mortgages more expensive by passing those costs that investors have on to borrowers in higher interest payments.
Diana, thank you very much. Appreciate your report tonight. Joining us now with more on this gnarly topic is Dean Baker. He's co-director at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Dean, the president says he wants to end Freddie and Fannie, or at least least their business model. And he says private capital should be the backbone of the housing market. You agree?
Well, it's kind of a mixed story here because he wants private capital. In fact, private capital is there in the sense that who buys the mortgage-backed securities? Obviously, that's private capital. But he wants private capital to be issuing the mortgage-backed securities, which is what we had, during the peak of the bubble. Citigroup and Goldman Sachs were issuing mortgage-backed securities. But this time, they'll actually be guaranteed by the government. So he doesn't want to get the government out. He still wants the government to guarantee the mortgage-backed securities with some first-dollar payments, first-dollar losses absorbed by the issuers and investors. So it's a mixed bag, and to my mind, it's really problematic because you get a lot of moral hazard issues here with private profit, government risk.
Dean, what does all of this mean to the person who's looking to get a mortgage? Is this going to be more expensive? Is it going to be more available? I mean, what does it all mean?
It's virtually guaranteed to be somewhat more expensive. I mean, in your introduction, you were saying that the private market has virtually disappeared. That's because they can't compete with Fannie and Freddie. It's not as though someone wants to issue a mortgage-backed security today, they can't go right out there and do it. But they can't do it in a way that will compete with Fannie and Freddie. So if we get Fannie and Freddie out, we're going to see higher costs because we know, let's say it's Goldman Sachs issuing it, they're making a profit on it. They have highly paid executives. All those people want money. That's going to add to the cost of mortgages.
There are an awful lot of people, I suspect, who would say that the government really has no role or no rightful role in the mortgage market at all, either standing behind companies as it did implicitly and then factually in the case of Freddie and Fannie, or to guarantee mortgage-backed securities at all. What do you say to that? Why should the government be involved in subsidizing or standing behind the mortgage market at all?
Well, I think it's a very good question. What I'd say is that the government can be very efficient in creating a secondary market, which we know from the history dating back to the early days of Fannie Mae, we know from the present, as government companies. When you get this mixed story with the government guarantee, I think in many ways you have the worst of all worlds. I think it would make much more sense, in fact, to say just leave it to the private sector. And we know it can do it. I mean, we have the jumbo market. You were talking about that a moment ago. So it's not as though we wouldn't have mortgages and even 30-year fixed-rate mortgages. People would pay a little bit more for them. So basically, I see this as a story as the government subsidizing mortgage-backed securities. I just can't really see how that's good public policy. We want to subsidize home ownership? Maybe. Mortgage-backed securities? A little hard to see.
As you heard in our report, one of the people that Diana interviewed said it's now or never to put this overhaul through. Will it happen? Do you think that we're going to get some kind of, reform of Fannie and Freddie?
If I had to take a bet, I'd say no, because the details, as you noted, are very complicated, and I hope people ask the good questions. I don't think they have a plan that gets rid of the moral hazard problem. That's what everyone has to ask about. We don't want the government taking the risk so that private banks could profit, as has happened in the past.
All right, Dean Baker, thank you very much. Dean is with the Center for Economic and Policy Research.
Comments from two Federal Reserve officials weighing heavily on the stock market today. The president of the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank, Dennis Lockhart, said the central bank could start reducing its bond buying program as soon as September. But he cautioned the Fed might wait longer if economic growth fails to pick up in the second half of this year. Then later in the day, it was the Chicago Fed president's turn. Charles Evans said much of the same stuff. He sees a pullback in the stimulus program sometime later this year, also depending on the economic data.
Well, those comments by Lockhart set the tone on Wall Street, and stocks never really recovered, but they weren't the only factors keeping a lid on things. IBM, the worst performer in the Dow 30, falling on a downgrade to sell. Big Blue also confirms it is requiring its hardware workers to take a week off with reduced pay. Also, mixed signal on the jobs front. According to government data, the number of job openings in June hit its highest level in 5 years. All of this added up to a second day of losses for stocks. The Dow fell 93 points to close at 15,518. It was the Dow's biggest point and percentage decline since June 28th. The NASDAQ was off 27, and the S&P was down nearly 10.
More legal trouble for Bank of America. The Department of Justice filing 2 civil lawsuits against the bank for what it calls misleading statements related to the sale of $850 million in residential mortgage-backed securities. The securities date back to the beginning of the global financial crisis, January of 2008. Just last week, Bank of America warned investors about possible new civil charges linked to the sale of 1 or 2 mortgage bonds.
And UBS has agreed to pay about $50 million to settle charges it misled investors. The SEC is accusing Switzerland's biggest bank of violating securities laws related to the sale of risky mortgage bonds. Under the terms of the settlement, UBS did not admit any wrongdoing.
Cybersecurity is topic A in Washington these days, and today attention turned to the nation's power grid. Security officials from some of the largest utilities met to discuss the threat of a cyber attack and figure out how to prepare for one. As Hampton Pearson reports, most believe it's not a matter of if, but when.
Top security officials from some of the nation's largest utilities told a Washington forum it's only a matter of time before the power grid is hit with a major cybersecurity attack. One official said his company views preparations on par with natural disasters.
We have to treat the cyber threat with the same respect that we give to forces of nature that impact our grid: hurricanes, floods, ice.
The power grid links some 3,200 utilities, thousands of generating units, a nationwide transmission and distribution network serving millions of customers. The kind of prolonged power outages and economic devastation that followed Superstorm Sandy, our experts say, what a worst-case scenario following a major cyber attack might look like.
The actual starting point of a cyber event may not be known until well into the event, and the systems that a utility relies upon for critical operations may be the very target of the attack.
Better information technology and more data sharing between utilities and the federal government are on the cybersecurity short list. But former NSA Director Michael Hayden says the cost of beefing up cybersecurity is a challenge for the utility industry.
It's really hard to build a business case for this. Okay, I mean, it really is. Okay, and so it's more of a broader responsibility case.
At some point, increased cybersecurity for the electric grid will mean higher costs for ratepayers. And the industry fully realizes that, in fact, could be a very tough sell to its customers. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Hampton Pearson in Washington.
Still ahead on the program, investors are eating up food stocks. Some are hitting all-time highs, others are struggling. We'll separate the winners from the losers. But first, here's a check on how the international markets closed today.
The war of words between CBS and Time Warner heats up. CBS's CEO Les Moonves fired back at Time Warner Cable's latest proposal to end its blackout of CBS networks, dismissing it as a publicity stunt. In a statement released today, Moonves said, "After reviewing your letter, we've concluded that there is not a sincere or helpful proposal in it." A Time Warner Cable spokesman said they were disappointed and that the offer was sincere. The outage is affecting 3 million customers in the largest U.S. markets.
We're learning more today about the deal to sell the Washington Post to Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. Chairman and CEO Donald Graham of the Washington Post says he knew the newspaper that his family owned for 80 years could survive and grow, but he wasn't sure if his company was the one to do it. Then came Bezos, who calls the acquisition a personal endeavor. It took just a few meetings, and the deal was done.
We met at a conference face-to-face twice, the second week in July. We spent an hour together. He asked for time to study the numbers. We then spent another 2 hours together. And at the end of it, he said that he thought he wanted to go ahead.
And it looks like investors want to go ahead with this, too. Shares of the Washington Post rose more than 4% today, closing at a 52-week high, $593. Tyler?
We begin Market Focus tonight with late-day earnings from Disney. The company says profits rose 1% from a year earlier as revenue grew at its theme parks and media networks. That helped offset weakness from the studio division and high marketing costs for the box office flop The Lone Ranger. And the company now says it expects to take a fourth-quarter loss on the film of nearly $200 million. The stock finished today higher by 1.5% to $67.05, but it fell after hours, as you see there. 21st Century Fox, Rupert Murdoch's newly separated company, missed earnings estimates by 3 cents a share, but revenue beat expectations thanks to growth at its cable operations and film studio. 21st Century Fox holds Murdoch's entertainment properties. The stock closed fractionally lower to $31.29. And Michael Kors hit an all-time high today after beating earnings and boosting its outlook. The luxury apparel maker was helped by the rollout of shops within department stores such as Macy's and Nordstrom and gains over in Europe. The company also has plans to open new stores in India and Brazil. The stock up almost 4% to $70.39.
And a similar story for Fossil. Its shares surged almost 18%. The fashion accessory maker and retailer, which has been revamping its affordable luxury image, surprised investors with better-than-expected earnings on stronger watch sales in Europe and Asia. The company also raised its full-year profit forecast. The stock was the best performer in the S&P 500, closing at $126.55. But investors were disappointed with American Eagle Outfitters. Shares fell sharply after the teen retailer slashed its second-quarter earnings outlook because of weak sales, especially in its women's department, and also reported weak traffic in its stores. The stocks closed at $17.57, down 12%. Tenet Healthcare also reduced its outlook for the year, citing a drop in patient admissions. This is a trend across the industry as consumers choose not to see a doctor because they either lack insurance or face higher deductibles. The company, which is buying smaller hospital operator Vanguard Health Systems, also posted a loss for the second quarter. The stock fell more than 3% to $42.98. Well, are you hungry for some stocks hitting new highs? Hershey, J.M. Smucker, Hormel, and Tyson are just some of the names that are soaring this year and trading in record territory. But while investors feast on these food names, others in the group aren't as appetizing. Courtney Reagan tells us why.
The average U.S. supermarket carries nearly 40,000 different products, including both national and private label brands. Getting consumers to choose one product over another is nothing short of a monumental task for food makers. But many of these more than a century-old iconic food companies are still topping the shopping lists of both consumers and investors, despite the attraction of lower prices on grocers' private label brands.
By offering innovative new products and by supporting their brands with marketing, these big companies are better able to fend off the threat of private label alternatives.
Companies like J.M. Smucker and Hershey have gigantic marketing budgets to offer consumers promotions and blast them with advertising to make sure shoppers know about new products and remember old favorites.
With a name like Smucker's, it has to be good.
In addition to stable sales growth, food company stocks are relatively low risk, higher dividend-yielding investments. As a group, food company stocks are up 30% so far this year, bettering the returns of the benchmark S&P 500 index. Hershey, J.M. Smucker, Tyson, and Hormel hit fresh all-time highs today. Food companies are investing in a number of areas to make sure shoppers and investors stay hungry for what they offer. General Mills is launching around 200 new food products this year, and Hershey is expected to increase its marketing by 20% in the second quarter. But not all food makers are tasting so good. Kellogg is blaming sagging cereal sales on too busy consumers, saying sometimes consumers don't have time for a bowl of cereal. The world's largest cereal maker may also be hurting as more Americans shy away from carbs and sugar at breakfast, though it does offer healthier alternatives.
Just trying to get things that are low in sugar and low carbs.
I also like to get Special K cereal because I know it's healthy and tasty.
Many think there's good news ahead in the grocery aisle. As the cost of ingredients fall, so too will prices. S&P's Tom Graves thinks lower prices could lead to consumers stocking pantries and an overall uptick in sales volume, another bullish indicator for investors feasting on food stocks. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Courtney Reagan.
And coming up, how a small American manufacturer is competing with and beating its larger foreign competitors. Our Made in America series continues with a look at the secret to this firm's success. But first, how commodities, treasuries, and currencies fared today.
Get ready for a price war for electric vehicles. General Motors is knocking $5,000 off the sticker price of its new 2014 Chevy Volt. That reduces the starting price on the car to $35,000. Incentives on electric cars have been getting more aggressive as automakers try to improve sales. GM has already offered steep rebates on other versions of the Volt.
And as automakers push to sell new cars, Americans are holding on to their old ones longer. According to Polk Research, the average car and truck currently on the road in the United States is more than 11 years old, slightly higher than last year and almost 2 years older than a decade ago. It's an all-time high, and according to the study, the average age will continue to rise even as new car sales increase.
For more than 2 decades, small American manufacturers have been closing shop. It's just too hard to compete against larger foreign rivals. Today, all that's changing as more mom-and-pop manufacturers stage a comeback. Tonight, in the second part of our Made in America series, Phil LeBeau shows us how one cabinet maker is undergoing a renaissance.
Woodways in Zeeland, Michigan has never been busier.
We added 18,000 square feet to the back end of this building.
With 40 employees working 2 shifts, Woodways makes custom cabinets for homes and offices. This year, sales are up 20%, a far cry from 2007 when Suzanne Rudnitsky and her husband bought the bankrupt company and carved out a new business plan: design, build, and ship custom cabinets quickly.
We can compete globally because a customer can call us. We can do a design and have it on this machine in an hour.
Woodways and other small American shops are finding they can not only compete, but actually beat larger, low-cost foreign manufacturers thanks to machines like these, which can quickly crank out precisely cut products. They're CNC machines, computer programmed to cut specific designs and parts. For years, these machines cost well over $100 grand. Too much for many small companies, but not anymore. NewCNC.com in Holland, Michigan sells CNC machines for $40,000. Demand is so strong, it's expanding, hiring workers. The key to its success? Sourcing components globally.
There's components that are from Germany, Italy, Japan. We get obviously stuff from China. It's what we're trying to do is to cherry pick the very best components.
Automation and robotics, once feared by small manufacturers, now allows them to do more, sell more, and add more workers. Still, job growth for small manufacturers has been tepid because they need to stay lean.
Existing small manufacturers have learned that they have to sometimes turn on a dime.
Suzanne Rudnitsky says her cabinet company is proof. Small manufacturers can adapt and grow.
We're inventive. We come up with new ways to use the CNC. We come up with new ways to design cabinets. And that inventiveness is what we have here in America, and that's why we're growing, and that's why the jobs can be here and why manufacturing can be here.
For Nightly Business Report, I'm Phil LeBeau in Zeeland, Michigan.
And tomorrow we continue our Made in America series when Jane Wells goes on a shopping spree to show us just how difficult it is to buy American in today's global economy.
And you ask, we answer on Friday. Our Market Monitor guest will take your questions about your favorite stocks. Tell us which one you'd like him to discuss by logging onto our website, NBR.com. Please do keep your question to one single stock. I know it's hard, just one though, and include where you're from.
It is hard.
It is hard to resist.
That's Nightly Business Report for us tonight. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, please support your public television station.
And on behalf of your public television station, thank you very much for your support. Good night, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Nightly Business Report has been brought to you by
Sailing through the heart of historic cities and landscapes on a river, you get close to iconic landmarks, to local life, to cultural treasures. Viking River Cruises, exploring the world in comfort.
I'm Susie Garrett with a nightly business report news brief. President Obama taking aim at boosting home ownership by proposing an overhaul of the nation's massive mortgage market, saying it's time to wind down mortgage companies Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. On the earnings front, Disney says profits rose as revenue grew at its theme parks and media networks. That helped offset weakness from the studio division and high marketing costs for the box office flop, The Lone Ranger. On Wall Street today, comments from a pair of Federal Reserve presidents saying the Fed could start cutting its bond purchases later this year. That weighed on stocks. The Dow fell 93 points to close at 15,518. The Nasdaq was off 27. The S&P down nearly 10 points. Be sure to tune into Nightly Business Report right here on your public television station.